I stared at my bank app in disbelief, my hands trembling as I held my phone under the elegant dining table at Le Jardin, one of Boston's most exclusive French restaurants. The notification glared back at me. Card declined. Next to me, my husband. James wore a subtle smirk as he sipped his vintage Bordeaux, while his parents, the esteemed Dr. and Mrs. Harrison, watched me with barely concealed satisfaction. 3 years of marriage, and it had come to this, a power play over my career, as a software developer, executed in the most public way possible. The evening had started like any other family dinner, tense but manageable. The crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the private dining room, and the soft classical music playing in the background did little to ease the growing knot in my stomach. I'd known something was wrong when James had insisted on this particular restaurant, the same place where he'd proposed 4 years ago. Back then, I'd been a promising junior developer at a startup. Now I was leading my own team at one of the city's top tech firms. And that, apparently, was the problem. "Sarah, darling," Margaret Harrison's voice cut through my thoughts, dripping, with false concern. "Perhaps you should try your other card." She adjusted her pearl necklace, a gesture I'd come to recognize as her tell when she was particularly pleased with herself. Next to her, Richard Harrison, chief of surgery at Massachusetts General Hospital, barely contained his disapproving frown. I pulled out my other card, already knowing what would happen. Declined. James had planned this perfectly. The public humiliation, the family audience, the calculated timing. All because I'd refused to quit my job and take a more suitable position at his family's charitable foundation. They wanted a society wife, someone to organize galas and sit on boards, not a woman who spent her days coding and leading engineering teams. "This is what happens when you insist on being unreasonable," James said quietly, sliding his credit card across the table. "We talked about this, Sarah. The foundation position would be perfect for you. More appropriate for someone in our social circle, more fitting for a Harrison wife." The worst part wasn't the cancellation of my cards. I had my own savings they couldn't touch, something I'd always maintained despite James's insistence on merged finances. No. The worst part was watching the man I'd fallen in love with, the man who'd once supported my dreams, transform into someone I barely recognized. The James I'd met at MIT, brilliant and kind, seemed like a distant memory now. "I won't be needing that," I said, pushing his card back. My voice was steady, despite the anger and hurt churning inside me. I reached into my clutch and pulled out something I'd been carrying for weeks, ever since I'd first sensed the shift in our marriage. A single credit card, one James didn't know about, connected to an account he couldn't touch. Margaret's eyes narrowed as I handed it to the hovering waiter. "What's this?" she demanded, her perfectly manicured hand gripping her wine glass a little too tightly. "James, I thought you said you'd handled all the cards." "He did," I replied, before James could speak. "All the ones he knew about." I met my husband's shocked gaze. "Did you really think I wouldn't have a backup plan? That I wouldn't protect myself after watching what happened to Clara?" The mention of Clara, James's first wife, who'd been financially devastated after their divorce, caused an immediate reaction. Richard started coughing into his napkin, and Margaret's face turned an interesting shade of red. James, however, went completely still. "Sarah," he warned, his voice low, "this isn't the place." "Actually," I cut him off, "this is exactly the place. You chose it, after all. You wanted an audience? Fine. Let's give them one. Let's tell everyone how you and your family have been pressuring me to give up my career, my independence, everything I've worked for, just to fit your outdated image of what a wife should be." The waiter, who had returned with my card, quickly retreated. Around us, other diners were beginning to take notice of the tension at our table, but I wasn't finished, not even close. After months of subtle manipulation, of watching James slowly transform from my partner into his parents' puppet, something inside me had finally snapped. The story was just beginning, and as I sat there in that elegant dining room, surrounded by Boston's elite, I knew that by the end of the night, everything would change. What James and his family couldn't know, was that I had more than just a secret credit card up my sleeve. I had information that could shake the very foundation of the Harrison family's carefully constructed facade. And unlike Clara, I wasn't going to disappear quietly into the night. The silence that descended over our table felt suffocating. James's hand, which had been resting casually on the white tablecloth, curled into a tight fist. I could see the muscle in his jaw twitching, a tell he'd had since our first year together at MIT, back when our biggest arguments were about whose turn it was to buy coffee during late-night coding sessions. "Perhaps we should order," Margaret suggested, her voice artificially bright as she signaled for the waiter. But I noticed how her eyes darted nervously around the restaurant, checking to see if anyone had overheard my outburst. The Harrisons had always been obsessed with appearances, with maintaining their position in Boston's social hierarchy. It was one of the many things that had started to suffocate me over the past year. The waiter approached cautiously, clearly, sensing the tension. As he recited the evening's specials, I found myself remembering the first time James had brought me to Le Jardin. It had been different then. We were just two brilliant software engineers in love, celebrating my first major promotion. He'd been so proud of me that night, his eyes shining as I talked about my plans for revolutionizing our company's security protocols. When had that pride turned to resentment? "I'll have the coq au vin," Margaret announced, breaking through my thoughts. "Richard?" "The beef bourguignon," he replied curtly, not bothering to look up from his menu. "And another bottle of the Bordeaux." When it was my turn, I smiled at the waiter. "The salmon en croûte, please." My voice was steady, even as I felt James's disapproving glance. The salmon was the most modestly priced entree on the menu, a deliberate choice that I knew would irk him. Ever since his promotion to Chief Technology Officer at his family's company 6 months ago, he'd become increasingly fixated on projecting the right image. "The Dover sole for my wife," James interrupted, trying to assert control over the situation. "She loves Dover sole." I turned to face him, maintaining my composure. "No, James. I'll have the salmon. I can order for myself, just like I can manage my own career and my own finances." The waiter's pen hovered uncertainly above his notepad. James's face flushed with anger, but he nodded stiffly. "The salmon for my wife, then. And I'll have the lobster thermidor." As the waiter retreated, Richard finally looked up from his wine glass. "Sarah, I think you're being rather dramatic about all this. The foundation position comes with significant responsibilities. We're not asking you to give up working entirely." "No," I replied, meeting his gaze. "You're just asking me to give up everything I've spent the last decade building. My team, my projects, my reputation in the tech community, all so I can organize charity galas and supervise grant applications." "It's a prestigious position," Margaret chimed in. "Clara thrived there before." She trailed off, realizing too late that she'd stepped into dangerous territory. "Before what, Margaret?" I asked, my voice deceptively soft. "Before James cleaned out their joint accounts? Before your family's lawyers buried her in paperwork until she had no choice but to accept a fraction of what she was entitled to?" James's hand shot out, gripping my wrist under the table. "That's enough," he hissed. "You don't know what you're talking about." But I did know. I knew far more than any of them suspected. Clara hadn't disappeared completely. She'd just gone where the Harrisons would never think to look, into the tech world, my world. And over the past 6 months, as I'd watched my marriage crumble, she'd become an unexpected ally. "You know what I find interesting?" I continued, gently extracting my wrist from James's grip. How quickly you all forget that I'm not just your son's wife. I'm the head of cybersecurity for one of the largest tech firms in Boston. Did you really think I wouldn't notice the irregularities in the Foundation's financial records when you asked me to review them last month? Richard's fork clattered against his plate. Margaret's face, already pale, went absolutely white. And James? James looked like he'd seen a ghost. What exactly are you implying? Richard demanded, his voice barely above a whisper. I took a sip of my water, letting the tension build. Around us, the restaurant continued its elegant dinner service, oblivious to the bomb I was about to drop. I'm not implying anything yet. I'm simply pointing out that if you want to control someone, you should probably make sure they don't have access to your servers first. The wine steward approached with Richard's requested bottle of Bordeaux, but Margaret waved him away with a trembling hand. For the first time since I'd married into the Harrison family, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. Good. It was time they understood exactly who they were dealing with. Now, I said, smoothing my napkin in my lap, shall we discuss the real reason you're so desperate to get me under your control at the Foundation? Or should we wait for the main course? The silence that followed my question was interrupted by the arrival of our appetizers. The delicate arrangement of foie gras on Margaret's plate seemed to capture her full attention, while Richard mechanically adjusted his silverware, a habit I'd noticed he fell into when stressed. James hadn't moved, his face frozen in that particular expression I'd come to recognize, the one that meant he was rapidly calculating probabilities, trying to figure out his next move. It was the same look he'd worn when we first met. You know? I began, delicately spearing a piece of my salad. I still remember the day James and I met at the MIT hackathon. I was the only woman on my team, and we were competing against his group for the top prize. Your son was so convinced his team would win that he bet me dinner at Le Jardin if I could beat him. I allowed myself a small smile at the memory. He never expected my security algorithm to outperform his by such a margin. Sarah, James warned, but I continued as if he hadn't spoken. That's what attracted me to you, James. Your competitiveness, yes, but also your respect for skill and intelligence, regardless of where it came from. You didn't care that I was a scholarship student from a public school in Michigan, or that my father was a mechanic instead of a surgeon. You cared that I was brilliant. Margaret set down her fork with exaggerated care. That was a long time ago, dear. People grow up. They realize what's truly important in life. You mean they realize what's important to their family's image? I countered. Because James certainly seemed to change his mind about the value of my career right around the time your board of directors started questioning the Foundation's unusual transaction patterns. Richard's hand tightened around his wine glass. I don't know what you think you found. $7 million, I interrupted quietly. Transferred through a series of shell companies, ultimately landing in offshore accounts. All traced back to Foundation grants that were supposedly funding educational initiatives in developing countries. Except those schools don't exist, do they? The color drained from Richard's face. James reached for his water glass, his hand visibly shaking. I felt no satisfaction in their distress, only a deep sadness for what could have been, because they didn't know the whole story yet, didn't know that my investigation had started months before they'd ever asked me to look at their systems. I was already tracking similar patterns, I explained, my voice steady. My team had been hired to investigate a series of sophisticated financial frauds targeting nonprofits. The perpetrators were experts at hiding their tracks, but they made one crucial mistake. They got greedy and they got sloppy. Sound familiar, Richard? Margaret's perfectly manicured nails drummed against the table. If you're suggesting that, the Harrison Family Foundation... I'm not suggesting anything, I cut in. I'm telling you that I know. I know about the embezzlement, the fake charities, the kickbacks. I know about the board members being blackmailed into silence. And I know that's why you're so desperate to get me under your control. Because I'm the only one who's managed to follow the money all the way to its source. James finally found his voice. If you know all this, why haven't you reported it? I turned to look at my husband, really look at him. Despite everything, I could still see traces of the man I'd fallen in love with. The brilliant, ambitious programmer who'd once valued truth and integrity above all else. Because I kept hoping you'd choose me, I admitted softly. Choose us, our partnership, the future we planned together. I kept waiting for you to remember who you were before your family convinced you that image was more important than ethics. The waiter approached with our main courses, but Margaret waved him away with a shaking hand. The food wasn't important anymore. We'd moved far beyond the pretense of a family dinner. What do you want? Richard asked, his surgeon's composure finally cracking. Money? A position on the board? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's the problem with your family, isn't it? You think everything and everyone can be bought. That's why you never understood me. Never really saw me as anything more than an inconvenience to be managed. But I'm not Clara. I didn't marry James for his money or his family name. I married him because I believed in our shared vision of using technology to make the world better. I turned back to my husband. Remember that, James? Remember our plans to develop affordable security solutions for small nonprofits? Before your family convinced you that profit margins were more important than purpose? James's face had taken on an ashen quality, and for the first time that evening, I saw a glimmer of the man I'd married. Vulnerable, uncertain, caught between loyalty to his family and his own moral compass. The truth was, I didn't want their money or their power. What I wanted was something far more valuable, something I was beginning to realize I might never get back. The trust and partnership I'd once shared with James. But as I sat there, watching the perfect Harrison family facade crumble, I knew that the next few minutes would determine not just my future, but the future of everyone at that table. The maître d' hovered anxiously at the edge of our private dining area, clearly sensing the mounting tension. Margaret attempted to wave him over, probably hoping to diffuse the situation with another bottle of wine, but I caught his eye and gave a subtle shake of my head. This conversation needed to happen with clear minds. You said you've been tracking similar patterns, James said slowly, his tech background finally engaging with the implications of my words. How long have you been investigating the foundation? I took a careful sip of water, buying time to choose my next words. Do you remember last Christmas when you were so angry that I had to work through the holidays? That urgent security breach I was dealing with? I watched understanding dawn on his face. It wasn't our company's systems I was protecting. It was tracking the first signs of the Foundation's fraudulent activities. That's impossible, Richard interjected, but his voice lacked its usual authority. Our security systems are state-of-the-art. We have the best money can buy, I finished for him. Yes, you do. But here's what you never understood about me, Richard. I don't just manage security systems, I build them. And every system, no matter how sophisticated, has vulnerabilities if you know where to look. Margaret's hand trembled as she reached for her wine glass. James, darling, surely you can control your wife's access to our systems. I couldn't help but laugh at that. Control my access? James may be your CTO, but he's not the only one with technical expertise. In fact, I pulled out my phone and opened a secure folder. Would you like to see the transaction records from last Tuesday? The ones showing the $2 million transferred to a supposed educational initiative in Guatemala? James leaned forward, his professional curiosity momentarily overriding his family loyalty. Tuesday's records are encrypted with a quantum-resistant algorithm. Even I don't have access to those yet. No, you don't, I agreed. But Clara did something very smart before she left. Something none of you noticed because you were too busy destroying her reputation and freezing her assets. Richard's surgical calm finally cracked. What are you talking about? Clara was just a socialite. She didn't know anything about our systems. Clara was a lot of things you never bothered to learn about, I corrected him, including being one of the first investors in my startup before I sold it and joined the corporate world. She understood tech a lot better than you gave her credit for. And she left breadcrumbs, digital breadcrumbs that only someone with the right technical knowledge would know how to follow. The color drained from James's face. The backdoor access. It wasn't a coding error, was it? No, I confirmed. It was deliberately placed there, hidden in a way that would only be noticeable to someone who knew exactly what to look for. Clara might not have had concrete proof of the Foundation's activities when she left, but she made sure that someone would eventually find it. Margaret's perfectly composed facade was crumbling. This is absurd. You can't possibly expect us to believe that Clara. That's why you pushed so hard for me to take the Foundation position, I continued, ignoring her interruption. Not just to control me, but because you needed someone with my expertise to find and close any security vulnerabilities. You wanted me to clean up your mess without realizing what it really was. The tension at the table was palpable. James was staring at his plate, his brilliant mind no doubt racing through all the implications. Richard had gone completely still, his surgeon's hands clenched into fists on the tablecloth. And Margaret looked like she'd aged 10 years in the past few minutes. If what you're saying is true, James finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper, why didn't you come to me with this sooner? I felt my throat tighten with emotion. Because every time I tried to talk to you about the Foundation over the past year, you shut me down. You started staying later at the office, canceling our date nights, pulling away. Then came the subtle suggestions about my career, the comments about how I was embarrassing the family by continuing to work in tech. You stopped being my partner and became their son instead. The waiter approached again, probably wondering why our untouched appetizers were still sitting on the table. James waved him away with an impatient gesture, his eyes never leaving my face. When exactly did you connect with Clara? He asked, and I could hear the mix of fear and curiosity in his voice. I met his gaze steadily. 3 months ago, right, after your father's speech at the charity gala. The one where he announced the Foundation's new international education initiative. Clara reached out through a secure channel, and suddenly everything started making sense. The irregular transactions, the shell companies, the pressure to get me away from my cybersecurity position. And now? Richard demanded, his voice hoarse. What do you plan to do with this information? I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of the encrypted drive in my clutch. That depends on what happens in the next few minutes, because this isn't just about the Foundation anymore. This is about choices, yours and mine. And James? I turned to my husband. You're about to make the most important choice of your life. The elegant dining room suddenly felt too warm, despite the perfectly regulated temperature. Around us, other diners continued their meals in blissful ignorance of the drama unfolding in our private corner. A pianist had started playing Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the same piece that had been playing the night James proposed. Your parents seem to think a canceled credit card is enough to control me, I said, reaching for my water glass, to steady my trembling hands. But what they don't understand, what you don't understand, James, is that I've been preparing for this moment ever since I found the first discrepancy in the Foundation's records. James's eyes narrowed. What do you mean, preparing? I drew a slow breath, fighting the urge to reach out and touch his hand like I used to when we were working through a difficult coding problem together. Remember 2 months ago, when I started staying late at the office? You assumed I was working on the new security protocols for our company's cloud infrastructure. Weren't you? The edge in his voice told me he already knew the answer. No, I was building a case, gathering evidence, documenting transactions, creating an unbreakable chain of proof that would stand up in court. Because I knew this day was coming. I knew that eventually your family would try to force my hand. Margaret made a small choking sound. Court? You wouldn't dare? I've already dared, I cut her off. The evidence is stored in multiple secure locations, with deadman switches set to trigger if anything happens to me. One copy is with my lawyers. Another is with a major financial crimes investigative journalist. And a third. I paused, letting the implications sink in, is with Clara's legal team. The color drained from Richard's face. You're bluffing. Am I? I pulled out my phone again, quickly navigating through several security layers. Would you like to see the proof? The timestamps on the transfers? The shell company documentation? The emails discussing how to pressure Clara into silence? James's hand shot out, grabbing my wrist. Not roughly, but with enough force to stop me from showing the screen. Sarah, please. Whatever you think you... know? I know everything, I said quietly, gently extracting my wrist from his grip. I know about the private accounts in the Cayman Islands. I know about the board members who were blackmailed into silence. I even know about the real reason Clara agreed to such a pitiful divorce settlement. The pianist moved into Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, its melancholic notes a fitting soundtrack to the destruction of my marriage. Because that's what this was, the end of something I'd fought so hard to preserve. What I don't know, I continued, my voice catching slightly, is when you changed, James. When did you become someone who would help cover up financial fraud? When did maintaining your family's image become more important than doing what's right? James ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache. It's not that simple, Sarah. The foundation does good work. The money we raise, the money you steal, I corrected him. Let's not dress this up in pretty language. You're stealing from charities, from educational programs, from people who desperately need that money. Enough, Richard growled, his composure finally shattering completely. You have no idea what you're dealing with, little girl. Do you think you're the first person to try to threaten this family? To think they could expose us? I met his gaze steadily. No, I'm not the first, but I will be the last. The truth was sitting here, watching James struggle with the weight of his family's crimes, was harder than I'd imagined. Part of me, a part I wasn't proud of, wanted to back down, to find some way to protect him from what was coming. Because despite everything, I still loved him. Still remembered the brilliant, ethical man who'd once spent 3 days straight helping me debug a security protocol, because it's the right thing to do, Sarah. We should take this discussion somewhere more private, Margaret suggested, her social instincts finally kicking back in. Perhaps back to the house. No, I said firmly. We finish this here, because I need witnesses for what happens next. I turned to James. Your father's right about one thing. I'm not the first person to discover what your family's been doing. But unlike the others, I can't be intimidated into silence. I can't be bought off. And I can't be controlled by canceling my credit cards or threatening my career. James's face had taken on an ashen quality. What are you saying? I'm saying that you have a choice to make right here, right now. You can choose to be the man I married, the man who believed in using his skills to make the world better. Or you can choose to be the man your parents turned you into, someone who values wealth and status over ethics and truth. The weight of my words hung in the air between us, heavy with the implications of what was to come. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a small USB drive, placing it carefully on the table between us. Everything's on here, I said softly. Everything I found, everything Clara found, in about... I checked my watch. 15 minutes. Similar drives will be delivered to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division and the SEC. Unless... What? James whispered, his eyes fixed on the drive. Unless you choose to do the right thing. Right here. Right now. The USB drive sat between us like a live grenade, its small blue indicator light pulsing steadily. I found myself remembering another night, almost 5 years ago, when James and I had stayed up until dawn in his MIT lab, working on what we thought would be revolutionary security software. "You weren't supposed to be like this," Margaret said. Suddenly, her voice brittle with barely contained anger. "When James first brought you home, we thought you were just another phase. A brilliant girl from the wrong background who would eventually realize she didn't belong in our world." I smiled, without humor. "That's funny. Clara said you had the exact same thoughts about her at first. Except she was from the right background, wasn't she? Just not quite controllable enough for your tastes." "Don't talk about Clara," James snapped, but I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. "Why not?" "Because she's the skeleton in the family. Closet? The cautionary tale of what happens to people who cross the mighty Harrisons?" I leaned forward. "Or because you still feel guilty about what you did to her." Richard's hand slammed down on the table, making the crystal glasses jump. "You have no right." "I have every right," I cut him off. "Because I'm not just James's wife. I'm also the person who helped Clara rebuild her life after your family destroyed it. Did you know she works for my company now? Under a different name, of course. She's brilliant with network security. Another talent your family never bothered to notice." James's head snapped up. "What did you say?" "You heard me. Remember Project Phoenix? The revolutionary security protocol my team developed last year? Clara was part of that team. She's been right under your nose this whole time, helping me uncover your family's fraud." The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the pieces falling into place in James's mind. All those times I'd worked late, the mysterious success of our security protocols, the way I'd gradually pulled away from his family's social circle. "It wasn't just about the money, was it?" I continued, my voice softer now. "Clara figured that out before I did. The Foundation's fraud was just part of a bigger picture. Tell me, Richard, how many other families have you destroyed to maintain your perfect image? How many other people have you silenced?" Margaret's hand shook as she reached for her wine glass. "You don't understand. Everything we've done has been to protect our legacy, our reputation." "Your lies," I corrected her. "I've seen the records, Margaret. Not just the financial ones. The private investigators you hired to dig up dirt on board members who asked too many questions. The threatening letters to journalists who got too close to the truth. The accidents that befell people who couldn't be bought off." James's face had gone completely white. "What are you talking about?" I pulled out my phone again, quickly navigating through encrypted folders. 3 years ago, a junior accountant at the Foundation noticed some discrepancies in the international donation records. 2 weeks later, she died in a car accident. Last year, a board member started asking questions about the educational initiatives in South America. His teenage daughter suddenly developed a serious drug problem and had to be sent to a very expensive, very private rehabilitation facility. "Those were coincidences," Richard said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Were they?" "Because Clara found something interesting in the Foundation's private servers. A folder labeled Insurance. Want to guess what was in it?" I didn't wait for an answer. Surveillance photos, bank records, medical histories, everything needed to destroy someone's life if they became a problem. James pushed back from the table abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I need some air." "Sit down," Richard commanded, but James remained standing. "Did you know about this?" he asked his father, his voice shaking. "About the surveillance? The threats? Everything I've done has been to protect this family. Richard replied, his surgeon's composure cracking. To protect you. I watched my husband's face as the full weight of his family's crimes settled over him. This was the moment I'd been both hoping for and dreading. The moment James would have to confront the truth about his family's legacy. That night Clara left, I said quietly. She wasn't running away from a failed marriage. She was running for her life. Because she'd found evidence of something even worse than financial fraud, hadn't she, Richard? Something that would destroy not just the foundation, but the entire Harrison family. Margaret made a small, choked sound. James turned to his mother, his face a mask of confusion and growing horror. Mom? Don't, Richard warned, but it was too late. The medical research, Margaret whispered, her perfectly maintained facade finally crumbling. The experimental treatments, the falsified trial results. And there it was. The final piece of the puzzle, the secret that Clara had discovered and that I'd spent months verifying. Because the Harrison family's corruption went far beyond simple financial fraud. It reached into the very heart of Richard's medical practice, into the experimental treatments he'd been conducting through the Foundation's healthcare initiatives. The USB drive continued its steady pulse, counting down the minutes until everything would be exposed. I looked at James, the man I'd loved, the man I'd hoped would choose truth over family loyalty, and waited for him to make his choice. The experimental treatments, James repeated slowly, sinking back into his chair. Dad's research on advanced cancer therapies, the ones that made his reputation. His eyes met mine, desperate for denial. Sarah, please tell me that's not what this is about. I pulled out another document from my clutch, a simple spreadsheet that had taken months to compile. 37 patients, I said quietly. All terminal cases, all wealthy. All desperate enough to try an experimental treatment that promised miraculous results, and all of them dead within 6 months. Richard's face had taken on an unnatural pallor. Those patients were terminal. They knew the risks. Did they? I interrupted. Did they know that the success rates you showed them were fabricated? That the previous trial data was manipulated? That you were using the Foundation's charitable medical programs in developing countries to conduct unauthorized trials? James's hands were shaking as he reached for the spreadsheet. How did you find this? Clara found the initial evidence in the Foundation's secured medical database. But it was your mother's meticulous record-keeping that provided the real proof. I turned to Margaret. You documented everything, didn't you? Every payment, every confidentiality agreement, every threat made to ensure silence. Richard leaned forward, his surgeon's hands clasped tightly on the table. You're looking at this all wrong. The potential benefits of these treatments. Benefits? The word exploded from me, causing nearby diners to glance our way. Tell that to Maria Santos's family. James's head snapped up. Who? Maria Santos, age 42, mother of 3. Stage 3 breast cancer patient who participated in your father's revolutionary treatment program last year. I pulled up another document on my phone. Would you like to read her autopsy report? The one that your father made sure was buried. Under layers of legal paperwork and falsified medical records? That case was an anomaly, Richard started, but I wasn't finished. Or how about David Chen, age 35, financial analyst with stage 2 pancreatic cancer. He mortgaged his house to pay for your miracle treatment, left behind a wife and twin daughters. The official cause of death was listed as complications from advanced cancer. But we both know that's not what really happened, don't we, Richard? The color had drained completely from Richard's face. James looked like he might be sick. Sarah, he whispered, please tell me you're wrong about this. Tell me there's another explanation. I felt tears threatening to spill, but forced them back. I wish I could. God, James, you have no idea how much I wish I could tell you this was all a mistake. that your father's research was legitimate, that the foundation was really helping people. But I can't, because the evidence is irrefutable. 6 minutes now. The USB drive's pulsing seemed to match the pounding of my heart. The children's program, James said suddenly. The new educational initiative. When is it supposed to launch? Next month, Margaret answered before she could stop herself. The first phase 1 of 3, I interrupted. Starting with schools in Dar es Salaam, Guatemala, expanding to Ethiopia and Bangladesh by end of year. Total estimated reach, 10,000 children. I met Richard's eyes. 10,000 potential test subjects for your next round of experimental treatments. James stood up so abruptly his chair toppled backward, the crash drawing startled looks from nearby tables. You were going to experiment on children? My God, Dad, what have you become? Sit down, Richard hissed. You're making a scene. A scene? James laughed, a horrible, broken sound. You're worried about making a scene when you've been planning to use innocent children as lab rats? 4 minutes. The USB drive's light was steady now, marking the approaching deadline. James, darling. Margaret reached for her son's hand. Everything we've done has been for the family, for our legacy. Surely you can understand. Understand what? He yanked his hand away. Understand that my father has been killing people. With unauthorized treatments? That you've been using our charitable foundation as a cover for medical experiments? That you were planning to experiment on children? It's more complicated than that, Richard started, but James cut him off. No, it's really not. He turned to me, his face a mask of anguish. The credit cards, the pressure about my job, the constant pushing to get you away from cybersecurity. It was all about this, wasn't it? About keeping your secrets safe. I nodded slowly. They knew I was getting close. Margaret's perfect composure cracked entirely. We had to protect the family name. You don't understand what it took to build this legacy. A legacy built on dead bodies, I cut in sharply. On desperate people who trusted you, who believed in Richard's reputation as a brilliant surgeon, who never knew they were just test subjects for treatments you knew weren't ready. The pianist had moved on to a somber Rachmaninoff piece, its dark tones a fitting backdrop to the unfolding tragedy. Around us, other diners continued their meals, oblivious to the destruction of the Harrison family legacy happening just feet away. The Foundation's international programs, James said, his voice hollow. The medical outreach initiatives in developing countries. Were those all testing grounds? I confirmed gently. Places where adverse reactions could be explained. Away. Where desperate people wouldn't question miracle cures that seemed too good to be true. Where deaths could be attributed to poor medical infrastructure rather than experimental treatments. Richard suddenly laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. You think you understand everything, don't you? You think this is all about money and reputation? Those treatments could have revolutionized cancer therapy. If we'd had more time, more test subjects, more victims, I corrected him. And that's exactly what Clara discovered, isn't it? Not just the fraud, not just the deaths, but your plans to expand the trials. To use the Foundation's new educational initiative as a cover for accessing even more vulnerable populations. James was scanning through the spreadsheet, his technical mind processing the data with rapid precision. I could see the moment he found the pattern, the correlation between Foundation donations and unexpected deaths in various international locations. The school programs, he whispered. They weren't just for money laundering. They were going to be access points for medical trials, I finished. Clean, controlled environments where children could be monitored, where adverse reactions could be documented without oversight, where parents could be convinced that experimental treatments were routine vaccinations. Margaret made a small, choking sound. We were trying to help. To advance medical science? By experimenting on children? My voice rose despite my efforts to maintain composure. By using the Foundation's charitable work as a cover for unauthorized drug trials? Do you have any idea how many lives you could have destroyed? The USB drive's light continued its steady pulse, each flash bringing us closer to the moment when everything would be exposed. James stared at it, then at the spreadsheet in his hands, then at his father. All those times you asked me to upgrade the Foundation's security, he said slowly, to implement new encryption protocols, to restrict access to certain databases. It wasn't about protecting donor information, was it? Richard's silence was answer enough. And now you understand why they were so desperate to get me away from my cybersecurity position, I added softly. Why they needed me under their control at the Foundation, because I wasn't just a threat to their financial fraud. I was a threat to everything. James pushed the spreadsheet away like it was physically painful to touch. Why are you telling us all this? Why not just turn over the evidence? I reached across the table, not quite touching him, but close enough to feel the familiar warmth of his presence. Because despite everything, I remember who you used to be. The man who spent 3 years developing free security software for nonprofits. The man who believed technology should help people, not hurt them. And I needed you to know the truth before you had to choose. Choose what? He asked, but his eyes said he already knew. Whether you're going to be complicit in your family's crimes, I said quietly, or whether you're going to help me stop them. The USB drive blinked faster now, its rhythm matching the accelerating tension at our table. In less than 10 minutes, everything would change. The question was, which side of history would James Harrison choose to be on? The steady ticking of James's expensive watch seemed to echo in the tense silence. 10 minutes? 9. 8. Each second bringing us closer to the moment when the carefully constructed world of the Harrisons would crumble. You don't have to do this, Margaret said, her voice taking on a pleading tone I'd never heard before. We can make arrangements. The Foundation position would come with full board privileges, complete access to all our resources. Stop, I cut her off, my patience finally snapping. Just stop. Do you really think you can still buy me off, after everything I've uncovered? After what you were planning to do to those children? They just didn't know how close until tonight. 2 minutes. The tension in the air was almost unbearable. What happens when that drive sends its data? James asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Everything comes out, the financial fraud, the medical experiments, the deaths, all of it. I met his eyes steadily. Unless what? Unless you help me stop it. Right now. Your father's research, the Foundation's programs, all of it. We can still prevent those children from becoming test subjects. 1 minute. Richard and Margaret sat frozen, watching their son, their perfect heir, stand at the crossroads of morality and family loyalty. James looked at his father, then his mother, then back to me. I could see the battle raging behind his eyes. Years of family conditioning warring with his own moral compass. If I help you, he said slowly, my parents will go to prison. Yes, the Harrison name will be ruined. Yes, everything they've built will be destroyed. Everything they've built was destroyed the moment they decided to sacrifice innocent lives for their legacy, I corrected gently. 30 seconds. The USB drive's light was now a constant glow. James closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and made his choice. Give me your phone, James said, extending his hand toward me. His voice was different now, harder, more resolved. It was the voice of the brilliant programmer I'd fallen in love with, the one who could solve impossible problems under impossible pressure. Richard started to rise. James, think about what you're doing. I am thinking. James cut him off. Sharply. For the first time in years, I'm actually thinking clearly. He turned back to me, The phone, Sarah. Now. I hesitated for a fraction of a second before placing my phone in his palm. James immediately began typing, his fingers flying over the screen with practiced precision. I recognized the intensity in his expression. It was the same look he'd worn during our hackathon days when we were racing against time to crack impossible security protocols. The dead man's switch, he muttered, more to himself than to us. It's not just time-based, is it? You would have built in additional triggers. Multiple fail-safes, I confirmed. Location tracking, biometric monitoring, network status checks. Margaret made a small, desperate sound. James, please. Whatever you're thinking of doing. Be quiet, he snapped, not looking up from the phone. I need to concentrate. 20 seconds remained on the USB drive's countdown. James's fingers continued their rapid dance across my phone's screen, navigating through layers of security I'd spent months building. I watched in growing amazement as he systematically dismantled and rebuilt protocols in real time. There, he said finally, just as the USB drive's light turned solid. I've rerouted the primary data streams and modified the trigger parameters. He looked up at me. The evidence won't go to the FBI or SEC. Not yet. Richard sagged in relief, but James wasn't finished. Instead, he continued, his voice gaining strength, it's all being uploaded to a secure server I control. Every document, every record, every piece of evidence Sarah and Clara collected. He turned to his parents, and it's going to stay there, as insurance. Insurance? Richard's face darkened. Are you threatening us, son? No, Dad. I'm stopping you. James's voice was steady now, certain. Here's what's going to happen. First, you're going to shut down the Foundation's international programs. All of them. Immediately. That's impossible, Margaret protested. The contracts are signed. The announcements have been made. Then unsign them. Make new announcements. I don't care how you do it, but those programs end. Tonight. James's tone left no room for argument. Second, you're going to turn over all of your research data, Dad. Every trial, every patient record, every result, real and falsified. Richard's face had turned an alarming shade of red. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious in my life, James cut him off. Because option 2 is that I let Sarah's evidence go public right now. Your choice. I watched this. Transformation in awe. This was the James I'd known was still there, buried under years of family manipulation and pressure. The man who understood right from wrong, who had the courage to stand up for his principles. The Foundation's legitimate charitable work can continue, he continued, his tech CEO efficiency taking over. But under new management and with complete transparency. I'll oversee the transition personally. And if we refuse? Richard's voice was dangerous now. James met his father's gaze, steadily. Then I'll press this button right now, and you can explain to your country club friends why you're being let out of your hospital in handcuffs tomorrow morning. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the pianist seemed to have paused, between pieces, as if the very air in the restaurant was holding its breath. Why? Margaret whispered, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face. Why would you turn against your own family like this? Because you stopped being my family the moment you decided that profits and prestige were worth more than human lives. James's voice cracked slightly. Because somewhere along the way, you turned into people I don't recognize anymore. People who would experiment on children. People who would kill to keep their secrets. He turned to me then, and I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen in months. Respect, admiration, and maybe, just maybe, a glimmer of the love we'd once shared. Sarah was right, he continued. About everything. About who I used to be. About what really matters. He squared his shoulders. And now I'm going to do what I should have done months ago. I'm going to help her make this right. Richard's surgical calm finally shattered completely. If you do this, you'll destroy everything we've built, everything we've worked for. No, James interrupted. I'll be saving what's left of our family's soul. He stood up, straightening his tie with steady hands. You have until midnight to give me your decision. After that, everything goes public. He turned to me, extending his hand. Shall we? I looked at his offered hand, then at his face. Determined, resolute, finally free of his family's toxic influence. This was the moment everything changed, the moment when power shifted irrevocably. Taking his hand, I stood. Yes, I said simply. We shall. As we walked away from the table, leaving Richard and Margaret sitting in stunned silence, I heard James murmur, I'm sorry it took me so long to see the truth. You saw it when it mattered most, I replied softly. The night air was cool on our faces as we stepped out of Le Jardin. Behind us, a dynasty built on lies was crumbling. Ahead of us lay uncertainty, challenges, and the hard work of making things right. But for the first time in months, we were facing it together. The valet brought James's Tesla around, its sleek black surface reflecting the golden lights of Le Jardin. Neither of us spoke as we slid into the car, the weight of what had just happened settling over us like a heavy blanket. James's hands gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, but he made no move to start the engine. They're not going to accept it, you know, I finally said, breaking the silence. Your father's spent too long building his empire to let it go without a fight. James let out a long breath. I know. That's why we need to move fast. He pulled out his phone, then paused. The secure server I mentioned, it's real. I set it up months ago after I first started noticing discrepancies in the Foundation's records. I couldn't bring myself to acknowledge what I was seeing. The encrypted database transfers, I said, realization dawning. The ones I couldn't trace? That was you? He nodded, a ghost of his old smile playing across his lips. I may have been acting like my father's puppet, but I never stopped being a programmer. Some part of me knew this day would come. I just didn't expect you to be the one to bring everything to light. A sharp tap on the car window made us both jump. Richard Harrison stood there, his face a mask of barely contained fury. James pressed the button to lower the window just an inch. If you leave now, Richard said, his voice low and dangerous, don't bother coming back. Everything you have, your position, your trust fund, your shares in the company, all of it will be gone by morning. James met his father's gaze steadily. Actually, Dad, I don't think you'll be in any position to make those kinds of decisions by morning. You see, while you were threatening Sarah with canceled credit cards, I was busy transferring controlling interest in Harrison Technologies to a blind trust, one that I control. The color drained from Richard's face. You can't do that. The board would never... The board already approved it. 2 weeks ago, right after I found the files about the planned pediatric trials. James's voice was ice, cold now. I may have been blind to a lot of things, but I'm still a better CEO than you ever gave me credit for. Margaret appeared behind her husband, her perfect composure completely shattered. James, please, we can discuss this as a family. Family? I couldn't hold back anymore. You want to talk about family now? After you tried to destroy mine? After you threatened my career, my reputation, my marriage? We were protecting our legacy, Margaret insisted. Your legacy is built on dead bodies, I shot back. On fraud and exploitation and human experimentation. And now it's going to end. James started the car, its electric motor humming to life. Midnight, Dad. That's your deadline. Either shut down the international programs and turn over all the research data, or tomorrow morning the world learns exactly what kind of legacy the Harrison family really built. As we pulled away from Le Jardin, I watched in the side mirror as Richard and Margaret grew smaller, two perfectly dressed figures standing frozen on the curb, watching their carefully constructed world collapse around them. "Where are we going?" I asked, noticing we weren't heading toward our penthouse apartment. "First, to my office. I need to initiate some protocols I put in place. Security measures to protect the company's legitimate assets and employees from the fallout that's coming." He glanced at me. "Then to meet Clara. She should be part of what happens next." I felt a surge of emotion, pride, relief, and something else I wasn't quite ready to name. "You knew about Clara? About her working with me?" "Not until tonight, but I should have. The security protocols your team developed, they had her signature all over them. I just didn't want to see it." He ran a hand through his hair. "God, Sarah, how did I let things get so far? How did I become someone who would look the other way while my own father?" "Hey," I reached over and touched his arm. "You stopped it. When it mattered most, you chose to do the right thing." "Because of you," he said quietly. "Because you were brave enough to stand up to them, to stand up to me." His phone started buzzing, calls and messages flooding in from his parents, their lawyers, probably half the Harrison family circle by now. He ignored them all. "They're going to try to paint you as the villain," he said. "They'll say you're trying to destroy the family out of spite, or greed, or—" "Let them," I interrupted. "The evidence speaks for itself. And speaking of evidence..." I pulled out my own phone, quickly navigating through encrypted folders. "There's something you need to see. Something Clara found in your father's private server." James pulled into the underground parking garage of Harrison Technologies headquarters. "What is it?" "A list of names, dates, locations." I handed him the phone. "Every patient your father experimented on, every death he covered up, every family he silenced with threats or bribes." His hands shook slightly as he scrolled through the document. "There are hundreds of names here. And those are just the ones we could verify. There are probably more." I took back the phone. "That's why we can't back down, James. Not even if they agree to your terms. These families deserve justice." He nodded slowly, his face set with determination. "Then we'll make sure they get it. All of them." He turned to face me fully. "Whatever happens next, we do it together. No more secrets, no more divided loyalties." As we stepped out of the car, the towering glass headquarters of Harrison Technologies looming above us, I felt a shift in the air. The end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The next few hours would change everything, not just for us, but for hundreds of families who had been silenced by the Harrison legacy. And this time, we were on the right side of history. James's private office occupied the entire top floor of Harrison Technologies headquarters, a glass-walled sanctuary with panoramic views of Boston's glittering skyline. As we stepped out of the private elevator, I noticed the subtle changes he'd made since taking over as CEO. Gone were Richard's ostentatious artwork and pretentious decorations, replaced by clean lines and functional elegance. "Clara should be here in 20 minutes, James said, moving immediately to his computer. "I've given her full security clearance. The guards know to let her up." I watched as his fingers flew across the keyboard, initiating protocols and security measures we'd once designed together, in what felt like another lifetime. "Your father will try to access the mainframe. He still has override codes." "Not anymore," James interrupted, a grim smile playing across his face. "I locked him out of all critical systems the moment I found evidence of the pediatric trials. He just doesn't know it yet." The elevator chimed again, making us both turn sharply. Richard Harrison strode out, his face thunderous, Margaret trailing behind him. "You're making a terrible mistake," Richard announced without preamble. "Do you have any idea what you're about to destroy?" James didn't look up from his computer. "I know exactly what I'm destroying, Dad. The question is, do you?" "This is bigger than your moral crisis," Richard spat. "The research we're doing, The breakthroughs were on the verge of achieving. Breakthroughs? I couldn't hold back anymore. Like the breakthrough that killed Maria Santos? Or maybe you mean the one that left David Chen's children orphaned? Margaret stepped forward, her perfect makeup now streaked with tears. You don't understand. Richard's work could revolutionize cancer treatment. Yes, there were setbacks, but setbacks? James finally looked up, his voice sharp with disbelief. Is that what we're calling dead patients now? Setbacks? They were terminal cases, Richard insisted. They knew the risks. Did they? James stood up, his full height impressive against the backdrop of the city lights. Did you tell Maria Santos that the treatment you were giving her hadn't passed basic safety trials? Did you tell David Chen that you'd falsified the previous results? Richard's face flushed dark red. Everything I did was for the advancement of medical science. No, James cut him off. Everything you did was for your own glory, your reputation, your legacy. He turned back to his computer, typing rapidly. And now I'm going to make sure that legacy reflects the truth. On the wall of screens behind his desk, documents began appearing. Patient records, financial transfers, email exchanges, the evidence Sarah and Clara had spent months collecting, now displayed in stark, undeniable detail. Margaret gasped. James, please. Think about what this will do to the family name. I am thinking about it, James replied, his voice steady. I'm thinking about all the families who trusted us, who believed in Dad's reputation, who thought the Harrison name meant integrity and excellence. A new set of documents appeared on the screens, photographs, surveillance reports, threatening letters. The paper trail of the Harrison family's intimidation tactics. My God, Margaret whispered, seeing the evidence of their crimes laid bare. What have we become? That's the first intelligent thing you've said all night, a new voice announced, from the elevator. We all turned to see Clara standing there, her blonde hair now dyed dark brown, her former socialite polish replaced by sharp professionalism. She stepped into the office, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Hello, Richard, Margaret. Her voice was cool, controlled. It's been a while. Richard's face went from red to white in an instant. Me, Clara confirmed. Surprised. To see me? I suppose you thought I'd stay disappeared after you threatened to destroy my life if I ever came forward about what I'd found. Margaret took an unsteady step backward. Clara, we never meant— Save it, Clara cut her off. I'm not here for your excuses. I'm here to make sure you can't do to anyone else what you did to me. She moved to James's computer, her fingers joining his on the keyboard. I watched in admiration as they worked in tandem, their technical skills complementing each other perfectly. The international programs are being suspended, James announced. All funds frozen, all contracts put on hold. You can't do this, Richard started forward, but I stepped between him and the computer. Actually, he can, I said. And he is. Right now, every board member is receiving documentation of your unauthorized experiments. Every partner organization is being notified of the Foundation's suspension. Every regulatory body is getting evidence of your fraudulent research. You'll destroy everything, Richard's voice cracked. Years of work, millions in funding. Better than destroying more lives, James replied without looking up. Better than experimenting on children. The screens filled with new data, the plans for the international schools, the carefully disguised medical testing protocols hidden within routine health screenings. Margaret swayed on her feet, finally seeing the full scope of what they'd been planning. It's done, Clara announced, stepping back from the computer. All systems locked down, all data secured. Richard lunged forward suddenly, his surgeon's composure completely shattered. I won't let you— James caught his father's arm mid-motion, his grip firm but not brutal. Yes, you will, because if you don't, if you try to fight this, everything goes public. Not just the medical fraud, not just the financial crimes, but everything. Every patient, every cover-up, every threat. You'd destroy your own father? Richard whispered. No, Dad, James replied softly. You did that yourself. I'm just making sure you can't destroy anyone else. The city lights played across the office, casting long shadows as the Harrison family legacy crumbled in real time. Clara's presence was a silent testimony to all they'd done, all they'd tried to hide. And as I watched James finally stand up to his parents, I saw not just the man I'd married, but the man he was meant to be all along. The night wasn't over yet, but the worst was behind us. The truth was out, and there was no going back. The first rays of dawn were beginning to paint the Boston skyline when Harrison Technologies' board of directors began arriving. One by one, they filed into the conference room adjacent to James's office, their faces a mixture of confusion, anger, and fear. Clara, James, and I had spent the night preparing for this moment, organizing evidence, securing systems, and making sure every detail was properly documented. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, James began, standing at the head of the long mahogany table. I apologize for calling this emergency meeting at such an early hour, but what I'm about to share couldn't wait. Richard and Margaret sat silently. In a corner, under the watchful eye of two security officers James had personally vetted. They looked smaller somehow, stripped of their usual power and presence. Before we begin, a board member named Thomas Chen spoke up. Where is Dr. Harrison? As chairman, he should— My father is here as a witness, James cut in, his voice firm, but he is no longer chairman of this board. As of 3 hours ago, the SEC has been notified of serious violations involving both Harrison Technologies and the Harrison Family Foundation. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Clara stepped forward, tablet in hand, and began distributing digital copies of the evidence we'd compiled. What you're receiving now, she explained, her voice carrying clear authority, is documentation of systematic fraud, unauthorized medical experimentation, and criminal conspiracy spanning the past decade. Ms. Watson, another board member, sputtered, weren't you James's first wife? Yes. Clara's smile was razor-sharp. I'm also a senior security analyst who spent the last year helping to uncover this conspiracy. And before anyone suggests this is about revenge, I suggest you review the evidence in front of you. I moved to the presentation screen, pulling up the first set of documents. We'll start with the financial fraud. The Foundation's international. Programs were being used to launder research funds and cover up unauthorized medical trials. The room fell silent as we methodically laid out the evidence. Bank transfers, patient records, falsified research data. With each new revelation, I watched the board members' faces shift from disbelief to horror to grim acceptance. The Children's Education Initiative, James continued, his voice tight with controlled anger, was designed as a cover for pediatric trials, unauthorized, unethical medical experiments on children in developing countries. Margaret made a small, choked sound from her corner, but no one turned to look at her. Thomas Chen, who had started the meeting defending Richard, now looked physically ill. These trials, the deaths, how did we not see this? Because the system was designed to hide it, Clara explained. Trust funds, shell companies, layers of legitimate charitable work concealing the truth. I found parts of it during my marriage to James, but I didn't have enough proof. Not until Sarah and I started working together. And now? A younger board member asked. What happens now? James straightened his shoulders. Now we make it right. The Foundation's legitimate charitable work will continue under new leadership and complete transparency. All unauthorized medical programs are being shut down. Every affected family will be contacted and compensated. The company's legitimate operations will continue, I added, pulling up another set of documents. We've already isolated the compromised divisions and frozen associated assets. With your support, we can protect the jobs of innocent employees while ensuring justice is served. Justice? Richard suddenly spoke up from his corner. You call destroying decades of medical research justice? The room fell silent as James turned to face his father. No, Dad. Justice is making sure you can't hurt any more people. Justice is giving your victims' families the truth they deserve. Justice is making sure the Harrison name finally stands for something real. Clara stepped forward again. I've prepared detailed briefings for each of you on your roles going forward. The next few weeks will be challenging, but with proper management, the company can survive this. One by one, the board members began nodding. They were business people after all, and the path we'd laid out offered the best chance of salvaging their investments while doing the right thing. There will be those who try to stop this, I warned. People who benefited from the old system. They'll try to discredit us, threaten us, buy us off. Let them try, James replied, his voice carrying across the room. Every attempt at interference will be documented and added to the evidence. Every threat will be met with full legal response. This ends now. As the meeting continued, I watched the alliance forming, board members offering support, legal teams being mobilized, PR strategies being developed. The Harrison legacy was being dismantled, but something new and better was rising from its ashes. Clara caught my eye across the room and gave me a small nod. We'd done it. After months of careful planning, of gathering evidence, of building trust, we'd finally brought the truth to light. Richard and Margaret sat in their corner, watching their empire crumble as the sun rose over Boston. James stood at the window for a moment, his face reflecting in the glass, overlaid against the city skyline. The press conference is scheduled for noon, he announced, turning back to the room. By then, every major news outlet will have copies of our evidence. There's no going back. And as I watched the board rally around him, watched Clara coordinate, with the legal team, watched the machinery of justice begin to turn, I knew we'd chosen the right path. The truth was out, and with it came not just destruction, but the chance for redemption. The Harrison legacy was ending, but something far more valuable was taking its place: integrity, justice, and the courage to stand up for what's right. The press conference was set to begin in 2 hours, and I found myself alone with James in his office, watching as he methodically packed up his personal belongings. Each item seemed to carry the weight of memory: awards, photographs, the small bits and pieces of a life built on a foundation that was now crumbling. You know what I keep thinking about? He said suddenly, holding a framed photo of his graduation from MIT. That first algorithm we wrote together. The one that was supposed to protect nonprofit organizations from fraud. I moved closer, looking at the young, idealistic faces in the photograph. The Open Shield project. We spent 3 months coding it. And now here we are, using those same principles to expose my own family's fraud. He set the photo down, carefully in a box. I keep wondering when I lost my way. When I stopped being that person who wanted to protect people and became someone who helped cover up crimes. I leaned against his desk, watching as he continued to pack. You never completely lost your way, James. Even when you were going along with your family, you were secretly gathering evidence, building that secure server, creating backdoors in their security systems. But I didn't act on it, he said quietly. Not until you forced my hand. Not until you showed me exactly what my silence was enabling. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the office. Below us, news vans were already gathering, their satellite dishes pointed skyward like metal flowers seeking light. I spoke to Maria Santos's daughter this morning, I said softly. She's flying in from Chicago. Wants to be here for the press conference. James's hand stilled on the box he was packing. What did she say? She thanked us. Said she'd always known something wasn't right about her mother's death, but no one would listen. I moved to stand beside him. She's not angry, James. She just wants the truth. He turned to face me, his eyes bright with unshed tears. How do I do this? How do I stand up there and tell the world that my father, that my family, killed people for profit? That we were about to experiment on children? The same way you stood up to them last night, I replied, with courage and integrity. The same qualities that made me fall in love with you in the first place. A knock at the door interrupted us. Clara stood there, looking professional and composed in a tailored suit. The legal team needs to review your statement one more time, she said. And Sarah, the cybersecurity division, is asking about the protocols for the data release. James nodded, straightening his shoulders. I'll be right there. As Clara left, he turned back to me. You know what's strange? For the first time since I took over as CEO, I feel like I'm actually doing my job. Really doing it, not just playing a role my father created for me. I reached out and straightened his tie, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache. That's because you're finally being yourself. The real James Harrison, the one who believes in justice and truth, not just profit and prestige. I wouldn't be here without you, he said quietly. Without you and Clara working together, being braver than I ever was. Stop, I interrupted gently. You made your choice when it mattered most. Everything that happens from here on out, we face together. The intercom buzzed. More questions from the legal team, more details to finalize before the press conference. But before James could move to answer it, he pulled me into a fierce embrace. I'm sorry, he whispered against my hair. For everything. For not standing up to them sooner. For letting them try to control you. For becoming someone I never wanted to be. I held him tightly, feeling the tremors running through his body. You're not that person anymore. You're becoming who you were always meant to be. When we finally pulled apart, I saw something new in his eyes. A clarity, a purpose that had been missing for too long. He moved to his desk and pulled out a small notebook I recognized from our college days. Remember this? He asked, opening it to reveal pages of code written in his precise handwriting. Our original notes for the Open Shield project. I think it's time to revisit it. To use what we've learned to make sure nothing like this can happen again. A new legacy, I said, understanding dawning. Built on protecting people instead of exploiting them. Exactly. He tucked the notebook into his pocket. After the press conference, after all this is over, I want to rebuild everything. Not just the company, but our original vision. Will you help me? The question hung in the air between us, weighted with meaning beyond just business collaboration. This was about redemption, about reconstruction, about finding our way back to who we were meant to be, together. Yes, I said simply. I will. The intercom buzzed again, more urgently this time. The world was waiting, ready to hear the truth about the Harrison legacy. But in that moment, standing in the morning sun, I saw not the end of something, but the beginning. James squared his shoulders, ready to face what was coming. He was no longer the man who had let his family's corruption consume him, but someone stronger, better. Someone who had found the courage to choose truth over power, justice over legacy. And I would be there beside him, every step of the way. The press conference room at Harrison Technologies was packed beyond capacity. Journalists from every major network crowded the space, cameras flashing, microphones ready. In the front row, I saw Maria Santos's daughter, her face set with quiet determination. Next to her sat other families, victims of Richard's unauthorized trials, their presence a silent testimony to years of covered-up crimes. James stood at the podium, his posture straight, his voice unwavering as he delivered the prepared statement. Behind him, a large screen displayed key evidence, financial records, medical data, all carefully curated to tell the truth while protecting patient privacy. For decades, the Harrison name has been associated with medical innovation and philanthropic work, he began. Today, I stand before you to reveal the dark reality behind that reputation. I watched from the side of the stage as he methodically laid out the evidence, the financial fraud, the unauthorized medical trials, the planned expansion into pediatric testing. With each revelation, the room grew more silent. The only sound, the rapid clicking of cameras and the soft rustle of journalists taking notes. My father, Dr. Richard Harrison, used the Harrison Family Foundation to conduct unauthorized medical experiments on terminal patients, James continued, his voice steady despite the weight of his words. These experiments resulted in numerous deaths, which were then covered up through a complex system of legal and financial manipulation. From my position, I could see Richard and Margaret in a small room adjacent to the press conference, watching through a glass partition. They sat under guard, their faces ashen as their son dismantled their legacy piece by piece. The Foundation's planned international education initiative, James went on, was designed as a cover for expanding these unauthorized trials to include children in developing countries. Thanks to the efforts of our cybersecurity team, led by my wife Sarah Harrison, and former Harrison Technologies employee Clara Watson, these plans were uncovered before they could be implemented. A murmur ran through the crowd at the mention of Clara's name. She stepped forward then, taking her place beside James at the podium. 3 years ago, Clara spoke, her voice clear and strong. I discovered evidence of these activities during my marriage to James Harrison. When I threatened to expose the truth, I was systematically threatened, intimidated, and eventually forced into hiding. Today, I stand here not seeking revenge, but justice. The questions began then, a flood of them. James and Clara handled them with remarkable composure, providing clear, factual responses backed by the evidence displayed behind them. Mr. Harrison, one reporter called out, what happens to the company now? Harrison Technologies will continue its legitimate operations under new leadership, James replied. All compromised divisions have been isolated and affected assets frozen. Our priority now is protecting our employees while ensuring complete transparency and cooperation with authorities. And the foundation? Another voice asked. The Harrison Family Foundation's legitimate charitable work will continue, but under completely new management and oversight. Every program will be audited, every donation traced, every beneficiary verified. We are already in contact with affected families to begin the process of restitution. I stepped forward then, taking my place beside James. As head of cybersecurity, I can confirm that all evidence has been secured and verified. Multiple copies have been provided to relevant authorities, including the FBI, SEC, and medical oversight boards. A young reporter in the front row raised her hand. Mrs. Harrison, you were instrumental in uncovering this conspiracy. Did you ever fear for your safety? I met her gaze steadily. The only thing I feared was staying silent in the face of such grave injustice. Every person in this room who's lost someone to these unauthorized trials deserved to know the truth. Maria Santos's daughter stood then, her voice carrying clearly across the room. My mother trusted Dr. Harrison. She believed she was participating in legitimate medical research. Instead, she became an unwitting test subject in an unauthorized trial that killed her. How many other families have similar stories? James gripped the podium tightly, but his voice remained steady. Too many. And to every one of those families, I say this. I cannot undo what my father and our foundation did to your loved ones. But I can promise you the truth, full accountability, and my personal commitment to making whatever restitution is possible. The press conference continued for another hour, each question answered with unflinching honesty. When it finally ended, the three of us, James, Clara, and I, stood together as the cameras continued to flash. Phase 1 complete, Clara murmured, her professional mask finally showing cracks of emotion. James nodded, reaching for my hand. Now comes the hard part, rebuilding, making things right. As we moved to leave the stage, Maria Santos's daughter approached us. She carried a small photograph, her mother smiling and healthy, before the trials began. "Thank you," she said simply, looking at each of us in turn. My mother deserved better. They all did. "Yes," James replied softly. "They did. And I promise you their stories will not be forgotten." We watched as she walked away, her head held high, her mother's photograph clutched to her chest. In that moment, I knew that despite the chaos and pain that would follow, we had done the right thing. The Harrison legacy of secrets and exploitation was over. In its place would rise something new, built on truth, accountability, and the courage to stand up for what's right, no matter the cost. James squeezed my hand, and I saw in his eyes not the weight of destruction, but the promise of reconstruction. We had torn down the old foundation, but from its ashes, we would build something better, something real. The truth was out, justice was beginning, and healing could finally start. 1 month after the press conference, I stood in the newly renovated offices of what was now called the Phoenix Foundation. The old Harrison family foundation signage had been removed, replaced by a simple logo of a rising bird, a symbol of renewal and transformation that James and I had designed together. "The first round of restitution payments went out this morning," Clara announced, walking into my office with a tablet in hand. She'd taken on the role of compliance director, ensuring that every aspect of the foundation's operations met the highest standards of transparency and ethics. 23 families so far, with more being processed. I nodded, looking out over the Boston skyline. The city looked different now, somehow both smaller and larger than it had been before everything changed. "How are the families responding?" "Most are grateful for the truth more than the money," she replied, settling into one of the chairs across from my desk. "Maria Santos's daughter has agreed to join our advisory board. She wants to help establish new protocols for medical research. Oversight." The door opened again and James entered, looking tired but determined. He'd spent the past month testifying before various regulatory bodies, working with prosecutors, and implementing sweeping changes across both the Foundation and Harrison Technologies. The board approved the new Ethical Oversight Committee, he announced, loosening his tie. "And we've received preliminary approval for the Open Shield initiative." I smiled at the mention of our revived project. What had started as a college dream of creating security protocols for nonprofits had evolved into something much bigger, a comprehensive system for preventing and detecting financial fraud in charitable organizations. "The first beta test. Sites are ready," I added, pulling up the project details on my screen. 10 small nonprofits have volunteered to help us refine the system. If it works as planned, we can start rolling it out globally within 6 months. Clara leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. "Have you heard from your parents?" James's face tightened slightly, but he answered steadily. "Dad's lawyers are still trying to negotiate a plea deal. Mom's agreed to cooperate fully with the investigation in exchange for reduced charges. The past month had been brutal for the Harrison family. Richard faced multiple criminal charges, including fraud and unauthorized medical experimentation. Margaret had suffered a minor breakdown after the press conference, but was now providing valuable information about the Foundation's operations. The Medical Review Board is almost finished analyzing your father's research data," I said gently. "Some of it might actually be legitimate. We can make sure any valid findings are properly documented and ethically pursued." James nodded, moving to stand by the window. That's what I keep telling myself. That maybe some good can come from all this. That we can transform something corrupt into something beneficial. It already has, Clara pointed out. The new transparency protocols we've implemented are being adopted by other foundations. The Open Shield initiative will help protect countless organizations from fraud. And most importantly, the truth is finally out. I stood up and joined James at the window. Below us, construction crews were removing the last of the old Harrison Technologies signage from the building's facade. The company had been renamed Phoenix Technologies, matching its sister foundation. The first international education program launches next week, I reminded them. Real schools this time. Real help for real children. With real oversight, Clara added. Every dollar traced, every program verified, every outcome measured. James turned to face us, and I saw in his eyes the same determination that had driven him to expose his own family's crimes. We're not just rebuilding, he said. We're creating something entirely new. Something that actually lives up to the ideals we claimed to have all along. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the office, but they seemed less threatening now, more like markers of progress than harbingers of secrets. My phone buzzed with a message from Maria Santos's daughter. The advisory board's first meeting was confirmed for next week. The pharmaceutical companies that supplied your father's unauthorized trials are being investigated, Clara reported, checking her tablet. 3 executives have already resigned, and there are hints of similar programs being exposed at other institutions. A domino effect, I mused, one truth leading to another. James reached for my hand, a gesture that had become both familiar and new in the wake of everything we'd been through. We should tell them about the expansion plans. I nodded, turning to Clara. We're establishing a legal defense fund for whistleblowers in the medical and charitable sectors, people who want to expose wrongdoing but fear retaliation. Like I once did, Clara said softly. Exactly. We want to make sure no one else has to go into hiding for trying to tell the truth. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, a daily reminder of endings and beginnings. Outside my office, I could hear the sounds of the foundation staff working, phone calls about legitimate charitable programs, discussions of transparent funding mechanisms, plans for real educational initiatives. Sometimes I wonder, James said quietly, what would have happened if you hadn't been brave enough to stand up to them that night at Le Jardin? If you hadn't canceled those credit cards? I squeezed his hand. You would have found your way to the truth eventually. You were already gathering evidence, already creating backup plans. Maybe, he acknowledged, but you gave me the push I needed. You and Clara both. Clara stood, gathering her tablet. The past is the past. What matters is what we do now, with the truth exposed and the power to make real change. As she left the office, I looked around at what we'd built from the ashes of the Harrison legacy. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever is, but it was honest, real. Built on truth rather than deception, on helping rather than exploiting. Ready for tomorrow? I asked James. He nodded, his expression determined. Ready to build something worth being proud of. Outside, the city lights began to twinkle on, each one a reminder of the lives we now had the power to help, to protect, to serve with integrity rather than exploit with greed. The future wasn't certain, but for the first time in a long time, it was built on truth. 6 months later, I found myself back at Le Jardin, sitting at the same table where everything had changed that fateful night. The restaurant was different. Now, under new ownership after the Harrison scandal had revealed their involvement in money laundering for the foundation. The crystal chandeliers still sparkled overhead, but the atmosphere felt lighter somehow, cleaner. It's strange being back here, James said, adjusting his tie. It wasn't the expensive designer one his mother had given him, but a simple blue silk that matched my dress. Hard to believe it's only been 6 months. I reached across the table and took his hand, my wedding ring catching the light. We'd renewed our vows last month in a small private ceremony, not for show or society pages, but for us. A recommitment to truth and partnership. The Phoenix Foundation approved its 100th grant today, I said, smiling. Real grants for real programs. Maria Santos's daughter personally oversees the Medical Research Funding Committee. James nodded, his eyes distant. Dad's sentencing is next week. Richard Harrison had eventually pleaded guilty to reduced charges, facing 15 years in prison. Margaret had received a lighter sentence in exchange for her cooperation, though she would still serve 5 years. The Harrison name had been stripped from hospitals and research centers across the country. Clara called this morning, I continued, squeezing his hand. The Open Shield initiative has already detected 3 major fraud attempts at different charities. We stopped them before any money was lost. We're making a difference, James said softly. A real one this time. The waiter approached, not the same one from that night, but equally professional. This time I ordered without hesitation or concern for price. Not because I had something to prove, but because I had nothing to hide. Do you ever regret it? James asked suddenly, standing up to them that night. You could have just given in, taken the foundation position, lived the life they wanted for you. I thought about that other life, the one where I might have compromised, might have looked the other way, might have become another carefully controlled Harrison wife. The thought made me shudder. Never, I said firmly. Even if I'd known how hard these months would be, I wouldn't change what we did. The truth needed to come out. James lifted his wine glass. To the truth, then, and to the people brave enough to tell it. As we clinked glasses, I noticed a young couple at a nearby table, she in a simple dress, he in a slightly ill-fitting suit. They looked nervous, out of place, much like I had once felt in this restaurant. But times had changed. Le Jardin was no longer a bastion of elite privilege, but simply a place to enjoy good food and celebrate special moments. Phoenix Technologies. Stock hit a new high today, James mentioned. Turns out ethical business practices are actually good for the bottom line. I smiled, remembering our college dreams of using technology for good. The cybersecurity division has tripled in size. Clara's team is training other organizations to implement similar oversight protocols. Speaking of Clara, James said, reaching into his jacket pocket, she sent over the final numbers for the Victims' Compensation Fund. Every affected family has been contacted, every case documented, every story heard. The weight of those stories still sat heavy on our shoulders, but now it was a weight we carried together, openly, with purpose rather than shame. Your mother's therapist says she's making progress, I offered gently, starting to understand the magnitude of what they did, genuinely wanting to make amends. James nodded slowly. She asked to make a donation to the Foundation's new medical ethics program. From her personal accounts, not the family money, I think. I think she's finally seeing things clearly. The restaurant had filled up around us, the quiet murmur of conversation creating a gentle backdrop. Through the windows, I could see the Boston skyline, the Phoenix Technologies building standing proud, its new logo a beacon in the night. You know what I realized? I said, watching the city lights twinkle. That night, when your father canceled my credit cards, he thought he was showing his power over me. But really, he was just showing how weak their kind of power is, the kind built on control and fear rather than truth and integrity. James lifted my hand to his lips, kissing it softly. You showed me a different kind of strength. You and Clara both did. Our desserts arrived. Simple creme brulee, not the elaborate confections the Harrisons would have insisted on. As we shared the dish, I thought about all the changes these 6 months had brought. The Phoenix Foundation was now a leader in transparent charitable giving, its protocols being adopted by organizations worldwide. Phoenix Technologies had become known for its ethical business practices and innovative security solutions. The Open Shield initiative was protecting nonprofits across the globe. But more importantly, we had changed. James was no longer the conflicted son trying to please his corrupt parents, but a leader committed to making genuine positive change. I was no longer the outsider fighting to maintain my identity against their control, but a partner in building something truly meaningful. "Ready to go home?" James asked as we finished our dessert. I nodded, standing and smoothing my dress. As we walked out of Le Jardin, I paused at the entrance, looking back at the table where it had all begun. "You know," I said softly, "they thought canceling my credit cards would force me to submit to their control. Instead, it gave me the push I needed to stand up for what's right." James pulled me close, kissing my forehead. "Sometimes the attempts to break us are exactly what make us strongest." We stepped out into the night, leaving behind the ghost of that other evening, that other couple, that other life. Ahead of us lay not the weight of a corrupt legacy, but the promise of a future built on truth, integrity, and the courage to stand up for what's right. The Harrison name might have been destroyed, but something far more valuable had risen from its ashes, a testament to the power of truth, the strength of partnership, and the enduring impact of choosing to do what's right, no matter the cost.